Okay, well, good morning and welcome to everybody, and bore dara croeso. Delighted to see everybody here this morning. I know it's been a very difficult and in many ways a dreadful year. And I'm aware, as we all are at the Wales TUC, that it's been a particularly tough year for reps, all kinds of reps, because many of you have been working from home. Many of you have been working in workplaces in very different conditions, and life has been extremely difficult. So what we want to do today is to focus down very much on the kind of support and help that you need during these changing times. And particularly, I think, as we come out of lockdown and as things approach something near normal, because we know that skills and learning are going to be at the absolute center of everything that we do to build back better and to support working people to progress in their jobs and their careers and so forth. So that's pretty much what today is about. What we want to do, we've got quite a packed agenda, and you will have the opportunity to come in and ask questions and make comments. But essentially, this is about developing your skills and knowledge, and giving you the opportunity to ask questions and to know where to go for support, because that's absolutely essential. So some housekeeping announcements to start with. First of all, the session this morning is being recorded. If you're uncomfortable with that, obviously you can keep your camera off, you can anonymize yourself, but we will be using what we get from this morning to develop other events in future. So that's pretty important that you're all comfortable with that. Now, there's a link in the comments box that you'll see, which will take you to our privacy statement, which we have to display for you under the GDPR rules. So that's there for you to have a look at, and that links, of course, to the recording. Secondly, the TUC has a code of conduct, and I believe that that link has gone up. I shan't read out the code of conduct because you can all read it for yourself, but it's about the way in which we conduct ourselves, both in cyberspace and in physical space as well. So I'd be grateful if you take a look at that. Now, I need to let you know that we'll be muting all the microphones until the question and answer session. And there are two ways of asking questions. You can put a question in the chat box, the comment box on the right-hand side, or you can wait until the question and answer session and raise your hand. That's the little yellow hand icon, which I know that those of you who've been in lots of these kind of meetings will be more than familiar with now. I wonder too, if you could remember when you have spoken to take your hand down. That would be really helpful. Okay. Staff will be monitoring all the comments that come up so that we will be able to address those for you. The other thing is we have closed captions. So if you want to see, if you like, the written account of what's happening, just if you tap on the CC icon. If you have difficulty with that, put a comment in the box, and my colleague Gavin will support you in being able to access that. Right. Keep your chat box open, really important, because in there we'll be posting lots of links as we go along. And obviously you can save those over and have a look at those at your leisure. We'll be putting up our ULR survey. As I said, today is about reinvigorating and supporting you to do the role that you do for your union. So what we need to know is what you need. So the ULR survey is very much about that. So we'd be so grateful if you could ensure that you complete that and return it to us. At the end of the meeting, and I will remind you at the end as well, we'll have a feedback form, because once again, we want to know how we're performing, what we can do to improve, and so on and so forth. So please remember to fill that in as you leave, and I will remind you again. Okay, on to the agenda. Our first speaker is Derry Bevan. Many of you will know Derry. Derry has been at the TUC since right at the beginning of the learning programme. I don't think there's anybody in Wales who knows more, really, about the role of the ULR and how ULRs develop than Derry. So I think Derry's intention is to give you a world tour, really, of the history of the ULR, how that role developed, and how we see it going forward. So with no further ado, I'll hand you over to Derry.
Thanks, Sian. Morning, everybody. So yeah, as Sian said, we've decided this year really to have a sort of renewed push on sort of promoting and recruiting learning reps in Wales. It's important to say that, you know, this is nothing new. This is our day-to-day business. We've been doing it for like 20 odd years now. But, you know, there's a number of reasons why we think that the learning rep role is becoming growingly and increasingly important in Wales. And I think, so that's the reason why we're having this event today. It's the reason why we're doing the survey. It's a bit of a retro one for me, if I'm honest. As Sian said, I was around for the very first learning reps course. So a lot of the arguments and the sort of rhetoric that we're using is still relevant, but it does sort of take me back a little bit when we're talking about it. But I think the main reason why we're doing this is because, you know, everywhere you look at the moment in terms of skills and learning and workplace learning, the challenges that we face in Wales to deliver effective workplace learning and skills for adults, I think they all can, to a certain extent, be addressed by improving worker voice, improving sort of advocacy, learning advocacy, and peer-to-peer support. So they provide a lot of answers to those challenges we face in Wales, and not least in how we can amplify and increase sort of worker and learner voice. I'm going to sort of swap between worker and learner voice, if you like. I think, you know, obviously we primarily focus on workplace learning, but I think the arguments when it comes to including or amplifying worker or learner voice are the same for learner and worker, really. The other reason that we're sort of aiming to do this today is that the network may have, I think fair to say, slightly diminished in recent years for a number of a variety of reasons. I mean, there's, you know, the industries and the sectors that unions sort of recruit and organising have faced additional challenges, so there might be more problems in getting time off for reps. I think we could look at ourselves a little bit as well, maybe in the way that we've delivered union-led learning, and the agenda in Wales has become standardised to a certain respect, which means that, you know, new learning reps or new innovation around union-led learning has maybe dropped off a little bit, which has affected the network a little bit. And of course, COVID has had a big impact on, you know, the learning rep network itself. I mean, mainly because, you know, there's a lot of reps who may have become less active or dropped off just because they're not actually in work. So there's a number of reasons why we're doing this event today, and it's really important that we grow and protect the learning rep network. I'm going to take you on a bit of a whistle-stop tour today, really. Like Sian said, we're going to look at where we are with learning reps at the moment, where we've been, where we've come from, a bit of a history lesson in terms of learning reps in Wales, why they're so important, you know, especially around the issue of worker voice and learner voice, and why worker and learner voice is important in itself. And how we're thinking really about the future of the role, where it's going, you know, where the role can adapt and move forward, and protecting and growing the network. So a lot to get through really in the next 20 minutes. So if I go over, Sian, just tell me, because basically this seems like I'm just explaining what I've been doing work-wise for the last 20 odd years. So it's firstly important to say a couple of things. Like I said, this isn't new. We've been doing, like, we recruit and support and network learning reps as part of our day-to-day business, and have been doing for 20 odd years really. But the really important point to make is ultimately they're not our reps, they're union reps. And it's the union's responsibility, and they're the reps for their own union. It's their responsibility to grow the network and to support their own learning reps. And our role really as a Wales TUC is to link all those various rep networks within our affiliates together and help them work towards a bigger picture around adult learning and skills. So, but I think really important for me is to emphasize the word out of those three words, union, learning and rep. The word rep is so important. And I think maybe we've been a little bit guilty over the years of sort of neglecting that element of the role a little bit. Primarily, a learning rep is to represent their own members, to be an active part of their branch, to represent their union, and effectively to have a big impact on the overall union offer, if you like, in the workplace. We may have occasionally lost this over the years, maybe possibly focusing a little bit too much on the learning word in the union learning rep and neglecting a little bit on the rep role. It's so important to emphasize that a big key part of learning reps is collective bargaining, negotiating with employers and representing members. And the truth is, I think without both of those elements, both the learning being prevalent and the rep role being prevalent in the learning rep, it is a less effective role. So I think it's important to make that note from the start. So moving on to the next slide. Oh, why is it not moving? Anyone know? Gav? Oh, here we are. So, worker voice. Why is worker voice and learner voice so important? I think it's time to get out those old strap lines that we used in 2002, really. I think the one we used to say it regularly was you could have all the funding and the support and the courses available in the workplace that, you know, that are possibly available, but without that key link role, without that person there supporting, promoting and advising members and learners how to access learning, it is, you know, ultimately it is doomed to fail. You need that you need that key link of people supporting, holding people's hands, talking people through it, supporting learners. It's absolutely crucial. And even right at the beginning of when we first established learning reps, the rhetoric or the reasoning for that was because if you just leave it to an employer-led top-down, trickle-down approach where the employer decides and develops all their workplace learning, it's not going to address the key challenges. You need a bottom-up approach as well. And one of the best examples of this that I haven't actually used for years, but we used to use all the time, was Cardiff Bus, way back in, I think, 2003, where they'd effectively been trying to run a basic skills, an adult basic skills program for their staff for about 2 years, and it had failed. It never recruited. If it did recruit, people dropped out. We trained and recruited learning reps. We got the learning reps to co-design the program and then promote and recruit the program. And then it ran for 10 years and about 300 people went through it. So effectively it was the same program, but you know, I think the learning rep element, that worker voice element of bringing that through made that program much stronger. It is about, obviously, a stronger worker voice and skills increases participation. We know that. It's about equality of opportunity. So, you know, it's about making sure everyone has access to this training, not just the ones who normally have the confidence or the skills to access learning. But it's really important that we're not just doing this. It's not just about fairness. It's also about sort of cost effectiveness. It also makes business and economic sense. We know from numerous studies over the years with union learning that sort of dropout rates are lower, completion rates are higher, so there's less wastage in the system. We know that all employees being on board means that you know, a workplace becomes more productive, higher morale, more profitable. So, you know, it's not just to be nice. This does make economic sense as well. Some of the sort of basic issues around worker voice, if I could take you through some of those. I mean, the Taylor Review, which in 2017 sort of highlighted the importance of worker voice, and as they said, due to a growing imbalance of power in the workplace, making it actually difficult for employers to address new challenges, like, you know, new working trends such as remote working, new technologies. So they identified that worker voice is a way of, you know, helping employers address some of these challenges. The CIPD is something we've quoted many times over the year, primarily a HR-focused organisation, and I quote, said, for employers, effective worker voice contributes to innovation, productivity, improvement, and for employees, it's about job satisfaction and better opportunities for development. So, you know, lots of sort of big organisations, employer-focused organisations, understand the importance of worker voice. And from the employers that we've worked with over the years, I think they do too. Although, yet having said that, the most recent National Skills Survey found that your traditional ways of engaging, you know, employers and organisational participation have actually dropped. So your one-to-ones, your team meetings are actually, you know, sort of dropping off a cliff, really. So that is why the learning rep role is, you know, really, really needed. 3 areas, I think, that impact on worker voice that learning reps have such a big influence on. The first one, obviously, is the promotion of learning in the workplace and recruitment. So, you know, it's that participation, widening participation, encouraging everybody to get involved, even the hard to reach learners. That's an obvious one. Then we've got the sort of delivery and learner support. So, you know, making sure that, you know, access is at the forefront of thinking when you're designing delivery in the workplace, making sure that the learning reps are telling employers what works, what doesn't. And that key bit, which is providing learner support, getting feedback from learners, making sure that they're comfortable on the course, if they drop out, why, that sort of thing. And the third one, which I think sometimes gets a little bit forgotten, is the system, the learning system itself, both on a workplace level and on a national and regional level, really, a skills system. I mean, there's been so many times I've been to meetings where I can produce practical examples in meetings with, you know, educationalists and stuff, about how things do actually work in the workplace. And that's why learning reps are so important, because they give us that sort of practical basis to explain to people what works and what doesn't. As you can see there, I've said it's a demand-led system. And a lot of people talk about this in Wales, like skills being a demand-led system. But what do we mean by that? I think I would argue they largely mean employer demand. I mean, it's about, what courses fill and what sort of, and what's popular. But who creates that demand and how accurate is it without worker voice? I mean, you can take, for example, the just transition argument around sort of green skills at the moment. The demand isn't there because the jobs aren't quite there. So the employers aren't demanding those skills. The qualification pipelines aren't there. So we're almost starting trying to develop green skills because of the demand-led system. And I would argue that learning reps could sort of support that and identify that demand a lot easier than employers could. So the obvious thing to say is we're not saying that the employers' needs aren't important. They are vitally important. But where it works best is when we've got worker voice through the learning reps. We've got that Venn diagram, if you like, of the employer's needs and the individuals and workers' needs all being taken into account. That's when you get the most successful sort of workplace learning systems. So the strategic design of skills is really key. And this is why worker voice and learning reps, why we're having this push in this event today. I think if you look at all the rhetoric, if you like, coming from various governments and various policies around how we're going to recover post-COVID, they use terms like build back better. They're talking about introducing increasing fairness in the workplace. Environmental issues are always big. Accelerating new technologies has happened post-COVID as well. But I would argue a lot of these policies, whilst a lot of them say the right things and are well-meaning, they're doomed to fail to a certain extent if you don't build in worker voice. I think it's that old adage of doing it with the workforce, not to the workforce. And I think that's where learning reps have such a big impact. The last point there, that collectivising the individual need, this is something I've been talking about. It sounds a bit odd, but it's something I've been talking about for years. And it's an old-fashioned adage, really, I suppose. It's that together stronger thing. I think Welsh Government have shown that they understand the importance of an individualised approach, about getting people to take responsibility for their own learning, because they built individualised approach into their employability plan in 2018. And we've seen from previous recessions that funds and schemes that give the individual the power to decide on their own development, things like React, WULF to a certain extent, PLAs now, they have a bigger impact coming out of a recession longer term, because the individual is more likely to say, right, I'm not going to do a short-termist thing here. Where do I need to be in 5, 10 years? How do I build my career? And they take responsibility for their own development. And we've seen that in previous recessions. So the key for us is that it's the crucial bit of a learning rep role is collectivizing and organizing on the back of that. So like, if one individual wants a particular course in the workplace, there's very little buy-in power in that. They might not, that their voice might not get heard, but a learning rep can find another 10 people who want to do that same course in the workplace, and they can collectivize that individual need. It gives you more buy-in power, it gives you more say. And then crucially, you've got bigger economies of scale. So the employer knows what's needed, and it's that worker voice is being inputted into the workplace system, if you like. Here's the history lesson. So statutory recognition came about in 2002 by a Labour government at the time. It's important to remind ourselves of the original sort of reasoning behind why they did this, because I think it's still really relevant today. I mean, 3 of the main reasons why they did this were to improve the quality of work in life, to address the issues being sort of coming up from a changing world of work, new technologies, etc., and also to provide equal access so nobody's left behind when it comes to workplace learning. All 3 of those issues are still relevant now. And one of the quotes they did when they put this together in 2002 was to say, if we continue with an employer-led only system, it won't address what they called at the time the adult basic skills gap, which, I would say we did. Learning reps for the last 20 years have been brilliant. I mean, it's not gone, but we've done a very good job of addressing the adult skills gap now. But the bar moves, there are new challenges. And, that's why this has become relevant. We haven't done ourselves out of a job. The challenge just shifts, basically. So the first course ran in 2002. We had 5 people on it. I taught it, believe it or not. And then we moved to about 1,300 reps by 2014. Now, we know that's for various reasons has probably diminished. We're part of this push we're doing in the next 12 months is to try and drill down to find out exactly how many active learning reps we've got left in Wales. We know it's considerably less than 1,300. We number crunched, I think, in the early days possibly, and we realised it was quality, not quantity, that matters. And I think going back to what I was saying earlier about that balance between learning and rep, this is how we want to approach it now to build that network back up. The link between policy and delivery is key. I've already mentioned this, but the number of times we can sit in sort of social partnership meetings or sort of meetings on a national basis where we can show examples of how delivery is working in the workplace is so valuable to us, because otherwise a lot of it's just theory, and we can say, no, our learning reps are telling us this. And that is such an important link for learning reps, and it always has been, is that link between the policy and the actual real world, if you like. The early focus of learning reps was on basic skills, the adult basic skills gap. It was on ICT, it was on older workers. But we did sort of largely do a lot around, it was focused on essential skills, employability and learning only. I would argue, that role is different. Employability, the definition of employability has been changed to include things like health and well-being and morale and keeping people happy and comfortable and in work. So I think that's a really important focus that has adapted over the years. The balance for the original ULR role, if I remember rightly, because I used to know this off by heart, but there was things like, it was representing members on learning, promoting learning in the workplace, recruiting and supporting learners, and negotiating with employers. Now, I would say, going back to what I was saying originally, I think that the balance needs to be there in a modern sort of learning rep, if you like, is that element of negotiating and bargaining with employers, which I think might not have always been there with the learning reps in the early years. So it's an expanding role. I mean, learning is a thread through almost everything the trade unions do, but you were always seen as trade unionists the growing issues around health and well-being, automation, digital innovation. All of these issues now learning reps are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and they all have a learning element to them. The recent WULF survey we've done identifies a massive increase in how much health and well-being support learning reps are providing to, I think it's gone up something like by a third or maybe even half, they're providing to members in the workplace. We know that automation and digital innovation are a big issue, AI and all that sort of stuff in the workplace, and learning reps are having to deal with a lot of that as well. And the just transition thing, I mean, just transition is about, decarbonisation and saving the environment, if you like, but ultimately at its core, it's about retraining people from jobs that are under threat in high carbon industries and getting them trained to do equivalent and good quality jobs in low carbon industries. And that is a massive, it is all about skills, and the learning reps play a key role in that. There are emerging rep roles, and this is important at this point to say there are only 3 statutory roles, like legally, for unions, and that's your union rep, your health and safety rep, and your learning rep. We are trying to develop roles such as equality reps and green reps, and we hope they will come online. And we can learn a lot from how we develop the learning rep role as we're trying to develop those roles. But I think, learning reps could have a really important impact on those areas while we're waiting to bring those new rep roles online. Post-COVID, you've heard all this in the media, talking about economic recovery, career change, redundancy, youth unemployment, kickstart, all of these issues, they all need advocacy. They all need someone to support individuals and point individuals in the right direction. And that's where learning reps come in. As I say, those issues, those challenges that we're facing post-COVID won't be addressed by an employer-led system alone. And that's why we're doing this, and that's why we're trying to increase the learning rep role, to increase that worker voice. Right. This fair work and social partnership, I guess these are 2-hour seminars on themselves, basically. So I won't go into too much detail, but as many of you will know, fair work is a really big and important and growing policy area for unions in Wales and for the current Welsh Government. The Fair Work Commission in 2019 made 48 recommendations and identified learning and skills as absolutely key, but also they may have been a little bit sort of weak on, on directly on what learning and skills has an impact on fair work, but they did go big on collective bargaining. This goes back to what I was saying. The learning rep is a bargaining position as well as a learning position. So that's what will make the workplaces fairer and more equal. It's a better qualified workforce will lead to better pay, better terms and conditions, more increased progression in the workplace and career development. And that's the sort of unique selling point of a learning rep, if you like. It's not just the advocacy, it's that collective bargaining, it's developing learning agreements, establishing learning committees. And I would argue, I suppose a lot of you have heard about this sort of right to access lifelong learning, you know, an individual's right to access learning. Well, I'd argue where it works best, where learning reps are really truly active, because they're negotiating paid release, because they're negotiating with the employer through learning committees and learning agreements, that right to access is there. It is there in a really effective partnership, like active learning rep workplace. So that's really important. Social partnership, won't bore you with the details on this, but it basically is tripartite. It basically means you've got the employer, the union's needs, and the government involved in that tripartite model. I would argue that we've been doing this for the last 20 years in union learning, and it's one of the purest forms examples of it. You've got the employer's needs, you've got the workers' needs all coming into the pot and being identified to develop a learning programme. And crucially, then often you bring Welsh Government in, or you bring the government in to fund a lot of that programme. And crucially, it has an outcome. Like, you know, whatever comes out of that programme, people are better trained. And so it is, like I said, it's a really good example of how social partnership can work on a workplace level. I think learning skills and new learning reps are really key to that. Trade union access, I suppose, as we move forward, one of the key areas that employees interface with government is around skills funding. You know, they'll apply to Welsh Government for skills funding through Business Wales. I would argue this is an area that we could grow. I think, you know, you could incentivise this union learning model, this union learning rep model, this work advice model by putting certain conditions on some of that funding that requires you to work with learning reps, have learning committees, involve consultation and access and work advice is a way forward, I think. And it could eventually end up providing, you know, access for unions to non-unionised workplaces. And we've seen that through a recent campaign where employers who are non-unionised have been inquiring about WULF. And, you know, you start talking to them, you know, you're opening up that conversation with non-unionised workplaces because of skills and because of learning. And if we can get learning reps in more broader sectors, more broader industries, it could be a model that really could work for Wales, I think. Ultimately, recruitment is, you know, why unions are doing this. Don't think we've done it enough. I don't think, you know, the organising model around skills has never been explored enough. I know we don't count it for some reason, but I know that WULF projects over the years have actually developed recognition agreements, like on the back of skills. We know that we've probably recruited thousands of members over the years on the back of skills, but we've always kept a bit quiet about it because of that link to public funding. Is, you know, that's not what we're doing it for. But ultimately, I think we should be more open about that because it is about growing that sort of collective bargaining and recruiting members on the back of it. So it's important, again, another really important role for learning reps. So where next? Where next? Right. So as I said, it's one of the only 3 statutory roles we've got. So that's why we're trying to protect it. It's really important to protect it, especially given, you know, the UK government's disappointing decision to remove ULF in England. We don't know how that's going to impact on the network of learning reps across the UK, especially in England at the moment. In Wales, we've got an opportunity, while we've still got support for union-led learning, to make sure we protect learning reps. So it's important, probably more important now than ever, to network and grow that learning rep network. It really is key. The balance of the role, again, growing the network and embedding it is where I think we should focus the next push of learning reps, if you like, is not just to link them into WULF funding, link them into other types of funding and get them recruiting courses. That is important, but like I said at the start, we need to start doing more work on embedding them into the brand structures, getting them to negotiate with employers. That is really key. So that's what we're going to focus on in the next 12 months. Specialising and professionalising them. I think this is interesting because a lot of stuff is becoming, you know, sectoral in terms of skills. You know, like there are specialisms in certain sectors, you know, pathways, qualifications. I don't think we've done enough of that in the past. Like learning reps are at the sort of coalface, if you like, of developing skills in their industries. And there are lots of clusters set up regionally and nationally that look at specific skills. But like, for example, the one that always annoys me is we do workplace learning surveys. Learning reps do workplace learning surveys. We never send that information to those sector clusters or those industrial clusters. Why don't we do that? I mean, like, we've got a lot to offer through learning reps, through work advice, to input into those systems. And I think that's one area we will definitely be focusing on. And using the knowledge and experience of learning reps to embed and develop work advice is absolutely key. So that's basically everything I've just been talking about, embedding it for the long term, I think. So basically that's it. I think, I don't know if I've gone over time or under time, Sian, sorry about that, but I just sort of leave you with a few things. So like I said, we're going back to basics for this, but it isn't something new. We've been doing it for years. Just like to leave you with a couple of interesting facts. I think highlight how important learning reps and worker voice is. We've recently done a WULF learner survey, and some of the stats from that were incredible, that shows how important learning reps are. I think 95% of respondents, and we had thousands of respondents, said support was either very or incredibly useful that they got from learning reps. This one was the key one for me. We did a survey saying, like, sort of how relevant was the training when it was actioned or linked or got from the employer or through the union. 48% said their training was relevant when they got their information and advice from the employer. 71% said it was relevant and useful when they got it from the learning rep. So there's a big influence there of how relevant and useful, and how much the worker voice makes the training more useful for the individual. And finally, 84% of union learners said they would progress. And this is key. Welsh Government have been looking at progression and skills progression for years. And 84% of learners that went through WULF last year, through the learning rep system, said they will or already have progressed on to further learning. And 66% of them said they've already recommended their union learning to other workers and other colleagues. So you can see the learning rep thing is, it's a community network. It's different to an employer dictating what training you should do. They're more likely to share it. They're more likely to progress. They're more likely to take responsibility and ownership of it. And I think that, in a nutshell, is what worker voice is about. So I'll finish it there, Sian, but if anyone's got any, I don't know whether we're taking questions now or I'll stop sharing.
Okay, many thanks, Derry, for a very thoughtful contribution, I think. A lot of the focus of your contribution, I think, was about the fact that the role of the union learning rep isn't static, but it's changing all the time. I thought another of the terribly important points that you made was that social partnership around union-led learning has been going for 20 years. You know, we set this agenda in learning, and it works extremely effectively by any measure. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, I also noticed that there are lots of links going up in the chat box, not least, have a look at the information that we have on our Wales TUC website. We have a page dedicated to learning, lots going on there. And of course, you can speak to your WULF project managers, and you can approach us for support. That's terrifically important that you know that. Okay, moving on then. I'm delighted to be able to invite David Hagendijk to speak to us. Now, David works for the Learning and Work Institute and has had a lot of influence on policy in relation to adult and community learning, as well as workplace learning. So I think David's going to talk a little bit about what that is, what the role of the Institute is in advocating for learners and for the learner voice, and talk a little bit about statutory right to access learning support. So David, if I can hand over to you.
Great, thanks, Sian. I'm just going to share my screen. So it's a little bit of data I'd like to share with people that we've been sort of collecting throughout the pandemic. Let's do this quickly. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I'm just going to. The annoying thing is it won't quite, my screen won't quite move, so I'll get the slideshow element of this. Sorry, my laptop has just frozen and it's not letting me. There we go. So I'll just, I haven't got death by PowerPoint, I promise. Just a few slides I'd like to share. So I said before, yeah, I'm going to be focusing on, I suppose, what next around learning in Wales around participation, as we say, the right to access lifelong learning, and also around learner voice as well. A little bit about Learning and Work Institute, as Sian said, we're an independent lifelong learning and a research and development organisation focusing on lifelong learning, adult education skills, but also employment, fair work, and employability. So we cover quite a lot of ground. We've got a really good partnership with the Wales TUC. You sit on our strategy group, firstly Sean, now Derry sits on our group. So we do have that really good working relationship, and I think we're always keen to make sure that there's a real sense of a kind of common purpose and a common agenda between the two organisations, and we're always keen to make sure that we are focusing on workplace learning, but also I think that collective learner voice and workplace voice as well. So all I want to do, and that's not sharing, it's not flicking on, hang on a sec. Not sure you can, it stopped moving. I'm really sorry about this. The technology was working before. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to share a little bit of data that we've put together as Learning and Work Institute around participation and learning during the pandemic. I think what that's helpful, it gives a little bit of context, I think, just around what we've seen in Wales and across the UK, and also some of the real inequalities that exist around access to adult education and skills. So this is we've been running for the last 20 years the participation survey, which is mostly a UK-wide or British-wide survey. Sometimes Northern Ireland hasn't taken part. And then over the last 20 years, that's measured participation in adult education and some form of learning on an annual basis. And I guess what it's shown, as you would expect, is a big decline over the last 20 years in adult education, as funding's declined, particularly over the last decade or so. What we did see, however, was an increase in learning and interest in learning during the pandemic. So this is a survey, this is a question we asked in August or September last year. So it's only kind of 6 months or so of the pandemic. And it showed that nearly 4 out of 10 people in Wales were taking part in some form of learning during the pandemic. And that was likely to be informal learning, whether that be going online, accessing some form of learning, far less likely to be workplace learning, obviously, and also far less likely to be formal learning as well. That's one of the lowest percentages anywhere in the UK, but I think for a snapshot of a kind of 6-month period, 4 out of 10 adults taking part in learning is a very high figure. I just seem to want to move across me today. I'm trying to flick to the next slide, but I'm assuming I'm still on this one. There we are. Okay, so participation in the last 3 years is another question. This is the standard question that we've been asking for the last 20 years. And again, you can see Wales is around about 56% of people have taken part in some form of learning in the last 3 years. And again, I think Wales is reasonably behind other parts of the UK. But the story here, if I was to give you a kind of a graph of the overall kind of picture over the last 20 years, other than a couple of sort of spikes here and there that are probably cyclically just, a little bit not so robust, what you can see over the last 20 years, particularly over the last decade, is a decline in the percentage of adults taking part in some form of learning. And I think that is down to things like the big reductions that we've seen here in Wales in funding for part-time learning, for example. So far fewer people, adults going to college to access part-time learning, far fewer people accessing learning in the community as well. So I think what we've seen over the last decade is a declining pattern in terms of participation. But what we also see, and I think this is even more important, frankly, is and the figures I've got here on a UK level, is that even more importantly, is not just about an overall pattern of decline, it's the stark inequalities that exist in participation. So what we saw during the pandemic, for example, was that just 1 in 5 adults, so just 20% of the adults who left school at the first opportunity, so left school at maybe 16, mainly over that period, took part in lockdown learning. Yeah, if you stayed on in education, potentially till the end of till you went to university, so stayed on in education till 21, 57% of adults who stayed on in education till they were 21 took part in some form of learning. So again, what it shows, and this is a pattern that's repeated across the UK, is that those who need access to learning the most as adults are least likely to be accessing it and to have the opportunity or the incentive or the kind of recognition of why it's important sometimes as well. And that's reflected in class as well. So the adults in lower socioeconomic groups, so 29% of those, half as likely to take part in lockdown learning compared to adults in the higher socioeconomic groups. And one of the things we were most disappointed with, really, I suppose, about the lockdown is that only 1 in 3 adults who are out of work, and this included people who were on furlough during this period. So only 1 in 3 took part in some form of lockdown learning, compared to over half of those people who were in employment. And it kind of feels like a really missed opportunity during that furlough period. But it was a really tough position, obviously, for anyone on furlough. But I think with a collective effort led by government, and this is not a criticism, because I think government's under huge pressure right across the UK during this period. There was a real opportunity to take people who are they had this time on their hands, obviously not entirely with homeschooling and all sorts of other things, but there was an opportunity to engage them in trying to address some of the skills gaps they had as individuals, and I don't think we did that sufficiently well enough. And so it's not necessarily a criticism in dealing with a global pandemic, but nonetheless a missed opportunity. And again, that's just that kind of learning by social class, I suppose, is quite stark, really. So this is over the last 3 years. So you can see the higher socioeconomic groups, 74% of the top socioeconomic groups have been involved in learning in the last 3 years. It's less than half of the lowest socioeconomic groups. So we know learning isn't equal, participation isn't equal. And I guess this, I suppose, is the role of the trade union movement here in Wales, less likely now in England, given the loss of union learning funding. But here in Wales, there's a real opportunity to try and address some of that, I think. We are in a matter of 3 weeks, I think, or so, going to have a new government. Now, whatever happens, we're going to have a new education minister with Kirsty Williams stepping down. We're definitely going to have a new government, whether that's a Labour government again, a coalition government, or whatever it might be. I've done a quick kind of overview of just what the 3 main parties are saying so far in manifestos and policy announcements around adult learning, just to give you a sense of a flavour of what the parties are talking about. So the Welsh Conservatives, I don't think they've published their manifesto yet, I certainly haven't by yesterday. They're talking about a second chance fund. Again, a little bit kind of uncertain what that might look like, but that is potentially funding for people to access level 3 provision, a first time level 3 provision, which looks quite similar to the position now taken by the UK government in England. And they're talking as well about 150,000 apprenticeships over the period of the next Parliament. Welsh Labour, a bit more detail. I think they've committed to review of adult education with the intention of increasing the number of adult learners over the next 5 years, extending and building on personal learning accounts, a youth guarantee for all 16 to 24-year-olds to be able to have a high quality job, training or education. Again, the kind of apprenticeships provision, so that's 125,000 I think they're talking about. But there is, and as Sian was talking about here, the current government, in the agreement between Mark Drayford as First Minister and Kirsty Williams as Education Minister, set out a commitment to developing a right to lifelong learning. I think Kirsty herself, one of our events, has admitted the last year, I think, has seen this kind of drop off the agenda as a priority area. We've not made as much progress as we should have done on this, but there's a question mark, I think, in manifesto terms as to whether that right to lifelong learning would still exist under a Welsh Labour government, and I think part of that will be captured by the review of adult education. But this right to lifelong learning, and I will come on to this a little bit in terms of policy priorities, is really crucial that we have that right to lifelong learning. It opens lots of doors, I think, in terms of how you as trade unionists can sort of nudge employers and how you can organise in the workplace as well. Applied a kind of a bit more detail on some of their manifesto promises. So they have a youth guarantee similar to the Labour one, but they're also setting out a lifelong learning entitlement, so worth up to £5,000, I think paid, probably through the personal learning account programme, but also additional loans and maintenance where that provision is a kind of full-time provision to help people manage full-time provision where they're not able to obviously then access work. So there's lots in here, and you could see an emerging consensus around the importance of lifelong learning and education and skills as part of the next government. What we're talking about in terms of our own priorities is, first and foremost, I think we need lifelong learning policies. Kind of Derry said before, there's lots and lots of areas where we're talking to government collectively as organisations similar to ourselves. We're talking to government about the importance of lifelong learning and skills. But I think one of the biggest challenges is it exists in a silo to a certain extent. There's not necessarily that join between different aspects of policy. So we're calling for a cross-government commitment to a lifelong learning policy. And crucially, I think, to look at literacy, numeracy, and basic digital skills. This is one of the areas where, yes, we have, as Derry said, we've made lots of progress in Wales in this, and I think, and that's not least down to the work you do in the workplace. But there's still around about 8% of people without a working age population without any qualification, and it's a much higher figure when you go to people who don't have a level 2 qualification. And we know that, broadly speaking, that having a level 3 qualification, the equivalent of A-level BTEC kind of thing, is often a proxy for being more successful in terms of career progression and earnings potential. So those people who have the fewest qualifications, it is a concern, but it hasn't necessarily been a key focus of government, I don't think, over the last few years. And there are real inequalities between areas as well. I mean, it's always the case, but you've got kind of Monmouth with, I think Monmouth thinks at the lowest level of individuals without qualification, but a neighbouring authority in Gwent has 4 times the numbers. So literally just by that kind of local authority boundary, there is a huge inequality between 2 different areas. Also important as well is that, and again, as Derry said, and Derry stole a lot of my stuff, I think, in terms of meshing, which is a good thing in terms of having sort of common agenda, is it isn't just about skills for the workplace. This is also about enabling people to have a kind of social, cultural, and civic capacity. So it's about learning that is for life, but learning that is for enjoyment, for pleasure, but it's also about building up individuals' cultural and civic capacity as well. It's not just about a skill for a particular job at a particular time. It's about the kind of capacity that we're able to give individuals to take more power over their lives, to engage in civic life, and to enjoy cultural opportunities. And finally, on this kind of learning policy bit, I suppose, is an age and stage approach. There clearly are different needs for different people at different stages of their lives. What a 16, 17, 18-year-old wants in terms of starting out in their life is very, very different to what someone in mid-career will want as well in terms of learning. I think we have to recognise that, and we have to have that kind of flexible system to do that. But now, if lifelong learning policy is enshrined around a right to lifelong learning, which we hope it still is, we recognise that a right to lifelong learning is absolutely meaningless unless you have the infrastructure in place to make it a reality. So that, for example, is what we're talking here is about flexible and multiple entry points into learning. But that might be learning down your local community centre. I'm stone's throw away from the Caerphilly Miners Hospital Learning Centre. They do an awful lot of learning there. So for me, it might mean popping over to there to do a course. It might mean going online to start blended learning. But it also means what is the progression pathway from that? If I start a course, I've been learning over lockdown my football coaching qualifications, doing a level 3. What is a progression pathway for me as an individual? And then crucial to that as well is the advice and guidance that you give to learners. Now, part of that will be things like Careers Wales and Working Wales, but I think the ULR role here shouldn't be underestimated in terms of providing that advice and guidance and that signposting to further support and provision to enable people, once they've taken that first step potentially, whether it is kind of learning how to whether it's developing their digital skills and their computer skills, what's next for them? How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them learning? How do you give them advice and guidance to be able to point them to progression opportunities? Finally, is just around learner voice here as well. The kind of final sort of point around policy priorities, and it's really important here. This is something we need to bang on to government about a lot more. I think far too often when it comes to planning, designing, and delivering services, it is the providers that are in the driving seat. It's the providers that are pushing all of this, and we're not involving learners enough in the design of services. And this is actually one of the ways of working with the Wellbeing of Future Generations legislation is involvement. And so there is now a statutory obligation upon organisations to involve learners, to involve individuals, all of us, but in this context to involve learners in the planning, design, and delivery of services. And I think again, this is where I think trade unions have a really important role. But I think us as Learning and Work Institute, what I'd like to see in the next Senate, the next Welsh Parliament, is for us to be doing a lot more to aggregate the voice of learners, to draw on the experiences, to draw on the case studies, and to really bring that kind of policy agenda to life by talking about the impact that it has on individuals on a Wales-wide basis. And again, I think within that, it's important as well when it comes to learner voice that we are talking about the diversity of learner voice. I think far too often we talk about the usual suspects quite often, and we're not necessarily looking to. We're not very good, I think, collectively about bringing out the voices of a diversity of learners, particularly disabled learners. I think, and people in work is a real area where I think we need to do far more collectively. Finally, I was going to talk very briefly about some of our campaigns and in terms of your involvement, hopefully as ULRs and trade union movement more generally. So we run Adult Learners Week on behalf of Welsh Government. It's our week, but the Welsh Government fund us to deliver this annual event running for nearly the last 30 years or so. Went completely online this year in 2020. Normally it's been almost an entirely community-based activity. We had in a short space of, short few months really, as we adjusted to the pandemic, nearly 600 courses were put on the Adult Learners Week website with 200 different providers, including from trade union movement, individual trade unions, and the Wales TUC partners in this. We had, thousands and thousands of learners engaging in provision. A really, really successful week. I think it's given us lots of kind of learning about how we might want to change that going forward. So we had, probably can't see that too well, but we had, digital and technology skills. So we had over 11,500 searches just on that alone. Exercise, health and wellbeing, nearly 13,000 searches, and making and creating kind of a category we had on our website. Again, nearly 14,000 individual searches looking for courses there. So this, there was clearly an interest in learning, and it's clearly important that we kind of see how we can build provision around learner demand and understand that learner demand. And then here we had we run the Inspire Awards as well, and we get lots of nominations from trade union movement. Those nominations are open until the 30th of April this year, so please get them in. But as you can see from the faces and the people there, just some of the kind of stories that we were able to share of our award winners this year. And this is what Derry was talking about, I think, is learning. We're talking about advocacy, and we're talking about learner voice. It's all well and good for someone like me to do it, or someone like Derry to do it, but having the power of learners speaking about their own experiences, the barriers they faced. Just kind of pick out a couple of the people here, for example. So Emma, in the bottom left-hand corner with the kind of rainbow jumper on, she was drug addict, alcohol, I think, well, certainly substance misuse, but definitely a drug addict. Young mum in a real crisis point in her life, left school early, walked in to get some support in a centre, and next to it was a learning centre. She walked through there, and now she's at University of Glasgow. I think she's doing a master's in criminology or anthropology or something, and and she's now teaching at the university, as well as being a care worker. She was an essential worker, supporting work in the morgues during the pandemic. And just an incredibly inspiring individual whose life has been transformed through learning. And I know that her story is so much more powerful than any advocacy I can give. And I think it's so important that we draw those people out. We use their testimonies. We are the ones to put them in front of policymakers and decision makers. And you will have collectively as trade unions and ULRs, you will have dozens and dozens and dozens of learners who could advocate on behalf of other learners, who could advocate on behalf of lifelong learning and adult education. Now, one of the things I want to do in the next 5 years in this Parliament is to try and set up an all-party group on adult education, and to put learners at the heart of that. So we are collectively bringing together the learners who you've been supporting and we've been helping, and whose lives have been transformed by adult education, and put them in front of the new minister on a regular basis. Use them to hold ministers' feet to the fire, and to really, really kind of push and drive policy change for them. We can't do it alone, and you will have testimonies and individuals who could be a really powerful voice. And so I think one of the things I'd like you to do as ULRs over the next 5 years is to not only give people access to training and courses, but to build their confidence and to build their skills to be able to become advocates for the sector as well. And I just think you've got a vitally important role as trade unions over the next 5 years. We know austerity is going to hit hard, and whatever government is in is going to have a very difficult time, and it's going to have to make some very difficult choices around public policy. We have to have sharp elbows I think, around adult education and lifelong learning to make sure that the people we work for and the people who have the least access to learning don't miss out. So I hope that's been helpful, at least. Happy to take any questions or at the end or anything like that, and happy to share the slides as well, just in terms of around any of the data that anyone's interested in. I have no idea if I spoke too long. I probably did, so apologies, Sean. I'll hand over to you. I'll stop sharing and hand over to you.
Many thanks, David. That was a very powerful contribution, I think. And I think too that there are various themes emerging from what Derry has said and what you have said about the power of the culture of learning and how that the ripples of learning from workplaces through adult education in the community empowers people and changes lives. And I think that's terrifically important. David, we've got a couple of questions for you. Would you be happy to take those now? First of all, we've got Mary Halligan. Gav, could you unmute Mary so she can put her question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a second. Give me a moment and then I will do that for you.
I can see the question in the chat if that's helpful, but
Mary, do you want to come in here and put your question, or would you rather David take it from the comments box? This is the problem, you see, with cyber conferencing. It's so much harder to get people in the right place at the right time. But while we wait for Mary, David, perhaps you could take a question from Lindsay Imms.
Yeah.
Hi, Dave. I'm just going to open the chat to refresh myself of the question. Oh, yes, you were talking about the different socio-economic groups. Do we know what that lower group specifically, do we know what they were actually doing when they were learning? No, we don't from this survey. We don't know that necessarily, but I think what we would kind of surmise, I think, from a wider evidence base is there's a particular interest. It's really diverse. But certainly during the pandemic, there was lots of providers reported a big increase in accessing employability and essential skills support. I think one of the biggest challenges, actually, and this perhaps comes into some of the other questions, is when it comes to people accessing provision. One of the biggest barriers, there are barriers around cost, around kind of physical access, around transport, all those other things. The biggest single barrier why people don't learn, according to our participation survey, is they just don't see the need. They don't see the need necessarily to learn. They don't see why it's relevant. In a changing world of work, where you're going to have 50 years in work, the need for learning, of course, is so powerful. This idea that you're going to leave school at 16 or 18 and that's you set for life is just ridiculous. Yet that's how public policy is often framed. But we do know that during the pandemic, particularly, we think probably from the lower socioeconomic groups, those people who are most vulnerable in terms of changes in the labour market, we think they were accessing employability and essential skills support, just trying to give them an edge in the labour market. Again, we don't have a huge evidence base for that, but that's kind of what we sort of perceive, I think, from provider anecdote and a little bit of our own data. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I wonder if you could address Mary's question, David, which is in the chat box, Mary Halligan. Mary asks, do you think the reason for this is due to confidence, why those who have remained in school or studied at higher education are programmed to embrace learning, exams, etc.? ULRs can work to address confidence, access, etc.
Yeah, I think 100% that's right. I think it's also down to the perception of need. It's also down to what we've done lots of work around what we call the tipping point of learning, which is where as individuals, we all kind of weigh up the benefits of learning and we weigh up the kind of barriers that exist in our own lives. So whether that be, a course to kind of get you a little bit of some skills that you might need to get you that promotion at work or to get you the kind of pay rise at work that you might need, that obviously has a clear benefit for you as an individual. But you'll also be weighing that up against, whether it be childcare, time, wider kind of family life, and so all these things are kind of weighed up and balanced. But I think certainly for those individuals who left school early, or who've been out of formal education for some period of time, confidence is absolutely crucial. We did some work with older workers, a little bit of research for Welsh Government around older workers, and
all the evidence points and advisors and learners telling us that the longer you're out of formal education, the greater fear there is about returning back to the classroom or to some form of learning. And particularly if you didn't have a particularly positive experience of school or college or wherever it was, the idea of stepping back into that environment is very, very difficult. Which is where I think quite often, when we work with Welsh Government around running advertising campaigns around personal learning accounts and all the other kind of stuff we do, but that kind of peer-to-peer support which a ULR can provide, or even if it's not a ULR, it's another trade union member or a colleague in work telling them and encouraging them and giving them the confidence and the support to take that step back in. I think confidence is absolutely key, but as is also showing them the benefits of learning as well. That's absolutely crucial as well, but definitely confidence. But this is where I think confidence can be broken down, not by a minister or a government mandating you, or even an employer to a certain extent mandating you to go and do some learning, but it's about that colleague who you respect telling you and showing you and helping you and showing you why it's important and how to do it. So again, I think ULRs absolutely crucial on this kind of work.
Thank you, David. One more question from Natasha, and then we'll move on with the agenda. So Natasha Hurst asks, is there a sense what the key barriers are that result in certain social classes being far less likely to access learning, and what has been successful in increasing participation? Also, participation and barriers for other groups, for example, disabled people or by race. Is it wider inequalities that continue to obstruct participation? Very good question from Natasha there.
Yeah, thanks, Tash. And I've not seen Natasha in a while, but hello. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think part of that's about confidence, part of it is about past experience, part of it is about that kind of balance and the tipping point around learning. But there are particular barriers that exist. And we've done some work recently for Welsh Government around protected characteristics and access to the personal learning account programme. There's very, very limited data on that at the moment, but there's a lot of evidence out there around other learning programmes. And just kind of a couple really on disabled people, for example. Lots of the evidence we heard from disabled people and disabled organisations representing disabled people were talking about the kind of level of expectations for disabled people, about the kind of service that they're going to get and where it's going to lead. It's not necessarily that disabled people will kind of, will say, I don't want to learn. It's when it comes to employability programs, it's okay, what is the outcome? What is the barrier for me to accessing this training? And even if you're able to kind of remove some of the physical barriers that disabled people face, and I think it's important to frame this around in the social model of disability as well, so what we as organisations need to do to reduce barriers to learning. It's quite often the disabled people, it was like, well, okay, I can do this course, but it's not going to lead anywhere because an employer is not going to give me a chance, and an employer is not going to employ me. And that was certainly a key barrier for disabled people when we did some of that work. And simply and around race as well, I think. And again, I think this is probably far more complex in terms of we obviously can't just kind of say there's one single barrier for the whole of the kind of different ethnic minority groups that exist here in Wales. But certainly for those, particularly for Black communities, I think, in terms of our evidence base, it is the level of expectation and the level of trust they have in statutory or kind of government services. That again, is this coming back to who is advocating for them, who is communicating with them, and that's one of the key barriers. They don't necessarily trust that they will get a fair crack at the whip. They don't necessarily trust that they will be given fair access, or that it will lead anywhere in terms of employment. So, but it has to come from. I think it has when it comes to race. I think having people who look like them and who have the same experience, all well and good for me to do it, but actually people who have lived experience of their experience of what it's like to live in a modern Wales, telling them that learning is relevant to them and trying to address some of those barriers. And again, I'm not just saying this because you're at Wales TUC conference, but there are very few organisations in Wales that are looking to address these inequalities in the round. And I think Wales TUC trade unions clearly have a huge role to play in terms of addressing inequalities. My final point around disability, actually, is I think we have to challenge ourselves as organisations as well. We've done quite a bit of work recently on the social model of disability, and it was quite eye-opening, actually, I think, and still challenging to talk about it, to ensure that my language is right and that we are talking about it in the right way. But we have to flip how we perceive things and look at what we are doing as organisations to understand that it's our responsibility to listen, to learn, and to remove the barriers that exist for people, so that their impairment doesn't become a barrier to access. And I think, you know, again, probably here on disability and race and social class as well, it kind of feels like when we get a new target, whatever the government comes up with as a new target for qualifications levels or right to access, that we don't just have an aggregate kind of issue and say, you know, but if we can get participation up to 60%, great. But if we're leaving behind disadvantaged groups, then it's a failure. And I think that's where we need to kind of collectively argue and advocate for a different type of learner. But yeah, and I don't think I've answered that very well, Tash, sorry, but it's I think it's something which we really do need to kind of give more thought to and collectively kind of put some more work into as organisations, really.
Yeah. David, thank you very much. On the contrary, I thought that was a very informed and helpful contribution to the debate. I agree with you, this is something that we need to take forward in tandem, and certainly with our affiliate unions, because really this is an essential, critical and fundamental part of our mission when it comes to learning. So thank you very much indeed for your contribution on behalf of everybody. Okay, colleagues, moving on, we have Ian Thompson from ASLEF, a union that's very close to my heart, as I worked for ASLEF for some years actually in education. And Ian's going to share with us a really quite important story about how ASLEF was able to work through its learning programs to develop apprenticeships in train driving. So no further ado, can I hand you over to Ian?
Good morning, thanks very much. I'm a train driver for Transport for Wales. I'm based in Treherbert, and I'm also a Drivers' Company Council rep and secretary of that company council on behalf of ASLEF. I'm really pleased to have been asked to talk to you this morning about the experiences within my own union around learning and skills and the benefits of union learning reps. I have a specific example I would like to take you through shortly, but first I thought I'd give you some background to the approach we've taken to learning and union learning reps here in Wales. I've seen firsthand how important well-trained and active union learning reps are. We've had a very successful group of reps working to support rail workers into learning for many years now. Amplifying the work of voice in learning is crucial, and that's what union learning reps are so good at. Whenever we survey rail workers on skills, we get a true picture of the learning needs of the workforce. And we can then report that back to the employer. The employer now effectively being Welsh Government. The interesting thing is that the majority of issues that come back to us are not asking for anything unrealistic or non-job related. The requests are almost always for training to help people be even more effective at their jobs. And it's fairly obvious why unions want to increase the level of input that our members can have across all aspects of our workforce. It's important from the outset to say that ASLEF don't think that the voice of the worker should be heard simply because we want to be nice to workers, but it makes workplaces more productive, inclusive, and ultimately, and this is what all businesses look at, more profitable. We've certainly seen this from the good work that ASLEF has been doing, and hopefully you'll get this from some of the examples I want to talk to you about today. ASLEF has worked in partnership on learning and skills for many years in Wales, and with great support as well, and with a number of different employers in the rail industry, because as you all know, the franchise system means that we do have different employers in the railway system, and we have to develop new relationships sometimes. And it's fair to say we've had a varying degree of success in terms of working with the employers, so that our members have a say in their own training and development. ASLEF is in its second decade of delivering its successful WULF project in Wales. The main purpose of our project is to widen access to learning and skills throughout the rail industry, engaging the membership directly and negotiating not only with Transport for Wales, as we are now, but with all train and freight operating companies to sustain a culture of learning. Things have grown over the years, fortunately, and we are now an integral part of the employer's workforce development planning. And I think with the attitude that we see with Welsh Government, particularly under a Welsh Labour government, then we have a strong chance of becoming a more integral part of that under the likes of social partnership and so on. Union learning also helps equip train drivers with the skills and knowledge to achieve promotion to management or a different role within rail. The big benefit of this is that we know as union reps, as union learning reps, what a driver's life is like when and if these individuals then who take up the offer from the union learning reps go on to move into a different role, the big benefit of this is when those individuals then interact with a driver or manage a driver or allocate work to a driver, they know what a driver's life is like, which is a big difference. When you've experienced it, to then manage it, you have the experience to manage it. As you all know, the COVID pandemic has meant the past 12 months have been extremely difficult due to social distancing, which obviously we're all still experiencing. All planned classroom activities had to cease. The learning that we currently do to train drivers has train drivers, I should say, has taken on a completely different role with social distancing, even in the cab of a train. The union learning program itself has had to diversify in how it delivers it. The union learning reps have had to adapt to maintain their role. And I mean, today is a prime example of how we've had to adapt to deliver that role and to be ASLEF learning advisors. We're not able to mix with our colleagues to provide the traditional learning surgeries, but utilizing technology to provide information, advice and guidance via WhatsApp, Zoom in this case, Teams, whatever it may be, that's available to us. And over the past 12 months, the union learning reps have conducted 183, quite a substantial amount of information, advice and guidance sessions to tell individuals about the various learning opportunities available to them. So the ULRs adapted quickly to continue the learning opportunities for rail workers. I know it hasn't been easy for them because it hasn't been easy for me either. It may be a bit of a novelty in the beginning, but you quickly tire of staring at a computer screen and not being able to interact personally with people. In mid-March of last year, 2020, the project adjusted the focus, to online and distance learning, by investing in those new learning platforms to deliver accredited and non-accredited learning, with more people spending time at home due to the restrictions. Distance learning has proved very popular. And since April of last year, a record number of 130 online distance learning opportunities were assessed by individuals. And they were in numerous subjects from languages to PPE safety. Although I will say, as popular as it's been to use this distant form of learning, I still think it'll be great to go and have a pint and a chat afterwards, which is something I think we all miss after we've taken part in these courses and promotions. Under normal circumstances, a project would hold learner engagement events in the workplace, but obviously due to restrictions, this has not been possible. But it's been piloted, or we've piloted a joint initiative using Transport for Wales internal communication systems. I've used quite a lot of them as a union rep, and team sessions have been well received, as have Zoom sessions on subjects such as mental health well-being, highly important now during this pandemic. Resilience, communication skills, obviously highly important during this pandemic because of the methods we have to use, and influencing skills as well. So the role of the union learning rep has become even more crucial during the pandemic. A key factor is that these reps knew instinctively how best to continue offering support to their colleagues because they are colleagues. They know what it's like themselves on a day-to-day basis in work. And they developed a role to ensure we could continue giving workers a voice on those skills that they want. And that's one of the key benefits of ULRs. They are workers themselves. They understand what's needed to provide the best support to their peers. And they've adapted to deliver during the crisis yet again, in the same way as we are adapting now. ASLEF itself strongly believes in equality of opportunity. Each of ASLEF's 8 districts, which separate the UK really, has their own women's representative, their own LGBT plus rep, their own BAME rep, young persons rep, disabled persons rep, retired members rep, and each of these has its own committee. So we are, as a union, pretty dedicated to this equality and diversity. Access to training and development for everyone in the workplace is absolutely key to this. And we know that there is plenty of evidence that having a trained union learning rep in the workplace is an extremely useful tool and successful in engaging learners from groups traditionally underrepresented in adult learning, the figures for which were just very aptly demonstrated to us about those groups that are underrepresented, such as those without a level 2 qualification, such as those without any qualification, really. Welsh Government commissioned research in 2015 and found that union learning reps added real value with regards to workplace equality. And ASLEF projects in Wales have maintained a core network of union learning reps for many years for this actual reason, to increase the voice of the worker and to ensure they have a say on how they access training to develop their careers. And on the basis of developing careers, I want to take you through a specific example of how trade unions and myself representing ASLEF can have on workplace learning. The recent work we've been doing on driver apprenticeships in partnership with Transport for Wales and the other railway unions shows how including the voice of the worker can have such a positive impact. Almost 2 years ago, we were made aware of an issue where driver apprenticeships, or the qualifications of a driver apprenticeship, were available to workers in England, but not in Wales. It's to do with a fund that they can draw down on. And large elements of the apprenticeship policy for funding all apprenticeships is devolved to Welsh Government, obviously, within Wales. And that's why there is the differential. The employer, it started out as a Reaver, then it became Transport for Wales, and now it's obviously Transport for Wales Rail Limited. they were having difficulty in accessing the same level of training for drivers in Wales as they had in England. And the employer then engaged the unions for support. And I was privileged to be asked to take part in this engagement. And with ASLEF, Emma Penman on board, and Wales TUC through Derry, it was given a new and bigger level of importance. And working closely with the Wales TUC, the employer and Welsh Government, we were able to speak to lots of stakeholders and partners, and also to the relevant awarding bodies to address this particular problem. And importantly, we spoke to the drivers across Wales using the union network. We wanted to discover the level of interest in an apprenticeship and a qualification at the end of it, because currently, and I'm one of them, you don't have a qualification. You are a trained driver, but in the way many professionals qualify at the end of it with whatever it may be, an NVQ or a BA, anything like that, even though a trained driver is a highly skilled person, they don't actually have a qualification, or they haven't up until now. They haven't had the opportunity up until now. And we found that a lot of the workforce and existing workforce and the incoming workforce, there was a lot of interest and need by those individuals for this qualification. So that gave us the impetus to take it forward. And it took a fair while. A lot of meetings. Fortunately, a lot of those meetings back in the day were actually face-to-face. I know it seems strange as things are now, but yeah, fortunately, with all the work that's being done, we may get back to actually face-to-face meetings before too long. But thanks to the support of the unions, like ASLEF, our links to Welsh Government and the Welsh TUC, the employer is now able to offer that qualification across Wales. I've actually got a meeting later on today again with the people who are actually driving this forward. And in future, hopefully hundreds of workers will benefit from this by getting access to this qualification, to actually having the pride to say that they are a qualified trained driver and having a certificate to prove it, and it's fully funded. It's an example of how the unions use the voice of workers quite loudly, and social partnership networks to make this happen, because it had stalled. It was rather deep in the mud, and it took a bit of digging to get it out of the mud, but we managed to do it by all pulling together. And since then, we worked closely with the employer to establish this apprenticeship, but also to ensure that they seek to recruit young workers into these apprenticeships on Transport for Wales in a socially responsible way. The trained driver fraternity, if you look at the demographic, is an aging workforce, and from some information we've had, if you go to speak to younger people, it isn't, or very rarely is it, an aspiration to be a trained driver or to work in the railway industry. So that's one of the things that we've been able to make them aware of. And it includes them having targets for recruiting apprentices, for example, from deprived communities and from underrepresented groups. And credit has been given to the employer for this work, but much of it came about as a direct result of the partnership of working with the trade unions. As I said, and I speak for ASLEF, obviously, we are very aware of diversity and inclusion, and that's something that we want the employer to be very aware of as well. So this is an example of where increasing union input into workplace learning can improve the employer's workforce development planning, which yet again is one of the things that they will see as a benefit, because it's something that they don't have to pay to do in the future. They have this perhaps differently and more widely educated workforce that can quite easily move into other roles. The worker's voice obviously is heard through the input of this trade union and all other trade unions, and the Wales Trade Union Congress as well. And we're developing a case study on the driver apprenticeship programme in Transport for Wales, and it will be available on the Wales TUC website in the near future. A key point to remember is that the only reason we were able as a union to have input into this programme was thanks to our long-running relationship with management through our union learning reps. So that proves their importance yet again. And the Wales Union Learning Fund project. We've established a strong partnership with the employer over many years. And luckily we've seen it grow and go from strength to strength because of the work that tireless work that union learning reps have put in. They have proved the value of themselves and the whole project, really. They've run so many learning events, organised many courses to support rail workers to progress, to achieve, to get promotion. Hundreds have gone through essential skills courses, mental health awareness, digital literacy. And as a bit of a train driver dinosaur myself, I see that, you know, my industry, my job is moving more and more into the digital age. So, you know, I suppose now I'm one of those silver surfers that everybody goes on about, but it is an essential skill, and it's an essential skill that the Union Learning Rep Network is providing to those railway dinosaurs and silver surfers like me. And this learning has benefited the individual, certainly, but it's also benefited the employer. And it's what's given us the platform to negotiate and work successfully in partnership to undertake the important and successful work on the driver apprenticeships. And that'll benefit many existing railway workers, as I said, but also the new young workers starting their career in the rail industry, because luckily, different to many other industries and organisations out there, the railway can be a career. It can be sort of your only job. And for a lot of people, it has been their only job. They started straight from school many, many years ago, and they've retired out of the railway industry. The big difference now, I suppose, is that through the work of the Union Learning Reps, the opportunity is for these individuals now with various qualifications. It's the opportunity to progress through the industry from wherever they enter it to wherever they end up at the end of their career when they retire. So, as I said earlier, I'm really pleased to be asked to talk to you briefly today and tell you about this work. I think it's a wonderful achievement through working together. And it's taken a few years, but we're very close to the finishing line now. It's only dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I'd like to sum up by bringing it back to the reason for today. And that's to promote the use of union learning reps in Wales and to actually grow the network, to grow the number of union learning reps. The union learning reps job is to reflect the needs of the workforce back to the employer, and they are so able to do that because they are part of our workforce. They know what the needs are because they're in it. And we know from experience, as everybody has said, that from that experience, this happens successfully. Workplace learning is better, it's more effective and inclusive. ASLEF has seen lower dropout rates coming through our union learning program, meaning that more learners finish their course through our union learning rep supported courses compared to other adult learning schemes. An advantage of union learning reps supporting colleagues is those union learning reps themselves are also aware of the stress of shift work and sociable hours, juggling commitments, which helps the union learning rep when it comes to planning and making it effective and retaining those who sign up to actually finish what they've signed up for. It means less waste, more qualified workers, higher levels of engagement, especially from the harder to reach workers. And this is because the system is co-designed and ultimately driven by the needs of the workers themselves. And those workers, as I just said, are also union learning reps. So ASLEF will continue to promote the role of the union learning rep, and will also encourage all unions to do the same. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. I think that was interesting on so many levels, but it's so interesting to hear how, with the commitment from the union, how thoroughly learning can be integrated into every part of what the union does. To go so far as you've explained, as to allow learning to advocate and build the role in the industry as well. So I think that's absolutely terrific. Ian, if you're comfortable, we have a question from Derry in the chat box. Derry asks, how vital are ULRs given the barriers rail workers face with complicated shift patterns?
As I pointed out just now, for me anyway, one of the major benefits of union learning reps is they're not just a rep, they're also a worker. So they work under the same conditions. They suffer from the same stress that their colleagues suffer from. So understanding what your colleagues go through and how difficult it is for them to actually complete or to take part in the first place in the courses that are provided, they've got a unique insight into it because they are doing, in some ways, exactly the same thing. They are giving up their precious time from the commitments of the job itself to assist their colleagues. I mean, possibly, well, not possibly, I think certainly they're not rewarded or appreciated as much as they could be for the commitment and the time that they give into this, considering the stress that they are also under as workers on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian, indeed. Okay, colleagues, I'm mindful we are a little behind on the agenda, but we will pick up, I think. Can I introduce our next speakers, who are from the Wales TUC team? We've got Lindsay Imms, who's a Wales TUC Learning and Support Officer, emphasis on both learning and support, hey Linz. And Marion Burke, who's the Policy Officer for Trade Union Education. They're going to talk about union learning rep training and ongoing support. So Lindsay and Marion.
Thanks, Sian, and good morning, everybody. Particular good morning to, I know we've got a group of reps with us who are on their Union Learning Rep Stage 1 course this week. So a particular welcome to you. And now you can sit back and relax while I tell you how important you are. So we know, as people have said previously, that the ULR role is a vital one in any trade union. As Derry said earlier, it's one of only 3 union roles with statutory rights, making that really strong rep triangle or three-legged stool, if you like, of support for members. I think we all know how useful a two-legged stool might be. And as Derry said earlier as well, there are two others. That's the health and safety rep and the union rep, or some people call them the shop steward. Equality reps and green reps or environmental reps are very important, increasingly important, but they don't have that statutory recognition yet. So we really must recognise the importance of the role of the ULR and its standing as equal to a health and safety rep or a union rep because of those vital statutory rights. So what I mean by statutory rights is that ULRs have got the right to pay time off to train. They've got the right to pay time off to carry out their duties once they've completed that training. And they've also got the right to paid time off to improve their skills and knowledge. And that includes attending events like today or those face-to-face conferences when we're able to get back to them. But I think most importantly, those statutory rights are a recognition from government that the role is very important and must be supported. So we know that workplace learning and training is much more effective, as Ian was saying, as others have said previously, it's much more effective and much more productive when it's delivered jointly between the employer and the union. There's much more engagement from employees, and the learning itself is much more focused on what the learners themselves want, which is very often the skills to improve their own working lives. So effective learning in the workplace supported by a ULR and preferably a learning agreement as well to strengthen it results in lower staff turnover and as a result for the employer lower recruitment costs. As Ian was saying just previously, more ability to recruit from within because you've got that skill set within the working environment. There's less sick leave. We see increased staff confidence and morale, and crucially staff loyalty. Sometimes employers say to us, you know, what if we train staff and they leave? And our response is always, what if you don't and they stay? So ULRs aren't training and learning experts. I think that's important to mention, and we don't expect them to be, in the same way that we don't expect say first aiders to be paramedics. They're there to signpost and to support. So ULRs are there to signpost and support learners and work with the employer to get the very best learning and training opportunities that they can for staff in order to help the business, the individual learner themselves, but also the wider community. We've heard time and time again from learners who've been able to progress in work, but also been able to perhaps help their children and grandchildren with homework, perhaps for the very first time. So let me introduce Marion properly for you. This is Marion Burke, who's the Trade Union Education Policy Officer at the Wales TUC, and we're going to have a little chat about the ULR role. Hi, Emma.
Hiya, bore da Lindsay, bore da pawb. Dwi'n hapus iawn bod yma heddiw I siarad â chi am cynrychiolwi a dysgu'r undebau. So good morning, Linz. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you about union learning reps. So without further ado, I've got a burning question for you, Lindsay. So if I decided I wanted to become a ULR, how would I go about it?
Okay, so if union members want to become a ULR, the first thing they should do is talk to a rep or perhaps a branch chair or FTO, a full-time officer. They'll almost certainly be thrilled to hear from you, and they will know the next steps to take. It's a bit tricky to be more specific than that because different unions take different approaches, but the best starting point is always your existing union structures. Your workplace recognition agreement might mention specific numbers of reps. Some have limits on numbers of reps. So if there are more people wanting to be reps than there are places, you might need to have a vote. That happens rarely. Generally, people are welcomed with open arms, but it's just worth noting. And then once you go on to consider the training itself, some unions offer their own ULR training, or you can join a generic Wales TUC course where we bring lots of different reps together. And all this information is available from your union or from the Wales TUC website.
Great. So I guess the message is, if you're interested, get in touch with your union.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so a little bit of a curveball maybe for you. So say I'm an employer and I can see the real benefits that having a ULR in my company would be for my employees and for my business. How would I go about getting a union learning rep? How do I identify one?
Okay, so I suspect it would be a similar approach to my last answer, really. The best thing to do is to approach a rep or part of the union branch that already exists and talk it through with them. The difference for employers is that once you start to decide looking for a candidate for the role, existing reps will know about ULRs, but staff members might not if you've never had one before. So it might help to put out a bit of blurb about what being a ULR means, so that the opportunity is available to everyone. Your reps can help with this, or again, we can help you with that too. And then sit back and congratulate yourself for being a good employer, recognise the benefits of workplace learning. So I need to ask you some questions now, Maz.
Okay.
You're the education officer for us. Let's talk a bit about how the course actually is run. How does it work?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say at the moment, Lindsay, is like due to COVID, all of our union and reps courses are being run online via either Teams or Zoom, but this shouldn't spoil your learning experience, as the courses are run by experienced tutors who, I have to say, have worked really hard over the last year to try and recreate the face-to-face classroom experience online. So we'll have breakout rooms, there'll be group activities and guest speakers. And I guess our aim is to create that supportive learning environment like we do in the classroom, where you can share your experiences, learn from other people. And I guess what is most important, and I've heard this spoken about earlier on, is to start to build your own union learning support network. And as an anecdote, the fact that we've now had to hold our courses online has been a real opportunity for us, because it's also enabled us to run Wales-wide union and rep courses for the first time, which has been a fantastic opportunity for us. And I would say, if you're thinking, don't worry if you're not very confident about using Teams or Zoom. Just tell your tutor as soon as you enroll, and they'll provide you with all the support you need. What they usually do is run, say, a half-hour session a week, maybe a couple of days before, just to make sure everyone has got what they need on the day. And if they haven't got it, we make sure they've got it, so that getting online is no problem. So that's how we're running courses at the moment, but we're keeping an eye on what's going on with the regulations, and we do want to get back to classroom delivery, but we'll keep the situation under review. But of course, our priority is the safety of our students and our tutors.
Absolutely, that's reassuring to hear. Okay, so I've got myself on the course. What should I perhaps expect once I get there? How does it work?
So all of our union and reps courses have the same aim, and that's to give you the knowledge, skills, and importantly, the confidence you need to be a great learning rep. The Wales TUC Union Learning Rep course is a multi-union course, and it comes in two parts. And when I say multi-union course, it means anyone from any union can come and join. So we've got two parts. Part one is 5 days. Usually our preferred way of running it is 1 day a week. And that gives you an introduction to the role of the learning rep, sort of like your job description, if you like. You'll explore the barriers to learning. We'll explore learning as an equality issue, which has been talked about earlier, mapping your workplace and how to conduct learning interviews. And that's just to name just a few areas, but we'll give you everything you need to start your role as soon as you go back in the workplace. And I think, as you said earlier on, Lindsay, we're not expecting you to be education or training experts. So I'm not going to promise you that the course will give you all the answers. But I think what it will do is give you the knowledge and skills to be able to ask the right questions to get the information you need. So that's a part one. And the part two course, we usually advise reps to come back, do the part two after they've had, say, 3 to 6 months of actually doing the ULR job, when they've had a chance to practice what they've learned in part one. So there will be challenges and there will be opportunities in your new role as a union learning rep. And in the part 2 of the training, I guess what we focus on is you. We will look in more depth at developing you as a union learning rep. So this could mean we'll be looking at negotiating with your employer on policies, engaging with an employer provider on a closer basis, or maybe developing and delivering a learning project in your own workplace or branch. So I hope that sort of illustrates the difference between the part 1 and the part 2 of the course, and also why really you should consider undertaking the part 2 course.
Yeah, fab, thank you. So that's what sort of the Wales TUC approach looks like. But what about being able to do a course with my own union? Can I do that too?
Yeah, of course. The Wales TUC provides a rep training programme for individual unions, which includes union learning rep courses. Now, you may find that your individual union's union learning rep course may be shorter, possibly 3 or 5 days in total, maybe. But you're not missing out. This is usually because the union has a WULF project and a project manager, and where the union learning reps are very much part of the union team. It's that third leg of that 3-legged stool you talked about, Lindsay, and the union learning reps are really supported by the union to, I guess, basically learn on the job.
Fab, okay. Big question. Exams. Will I have to do exams if I want to be a ULR?
No, you won't. That's the answer you wanted, I know, and you won't have to do an exam. But all our courses are accredited by Agorad Cymru, which means you get official recognition and credits for the learning you've done. You get a certificate, and there's always a buzz when you get that through the door. To get the credits, it's fairly straightforward. You just have to complete a workbook, which basically collects your thoughts as you go along while you're doing your course. Now, your tutor will explain everything to you. They'll guide you through completing the workbook and give you all the support you need to gain the accreditation. And I have to say, we have an absolutely excellent student completion and success rate, which I think speaks for the quality of the courses. And again, if you need any extra help during the course or with filling in workbooks, you can speak to your tutor in absolute confidence.
Perfect, very reassuring. So I'd say I've done ULR stage 1 and perhaps even stage 2. Is there any further learning that I could go on to do?
Yeah, well, yes, there is, and we've listened to possible learning pathways. And what I would say is have a look at the Wales TUC course brochure, which I think is being posted in the chat. And you'll, as a learning rep, can enroll on any of the courses offered there if they're of interest to you. You could look at something a little less formal and look at our e-notes, which are short bite-sized learning programs in a range of topics which would be interesting to any workplace rep. Or I would advise you to look at your own union's reps training program as well. And of course, if you're lucky enough to have a Wales Union Learning Friend project, have a look at what courses are available to you there. But I think what I would say is just follow your dream, learn about what you are passionate about or interested in. Now, that might be like learning how to crochet from YouTube, me and you, Linz, or learning another language, or learning about the environment, or training to get a new job, or to help you get promotion, or, you know, even finally getting to do that degree you never did when you were younger. But whatever learning you decide to do, as a union learning rep, you will be the best example to your members that lifelong learning is for everyone, and it is really never too late to start. We've heard earlier that learning really is really life-changing, and as a union learning rep, you're going to have the privilege of seeing that change every day in your members and knowing that you helped it to happen. So I guess the last thing I would like to say is, if there's anybody listening who is interested in being a union learning rep and is a bit unsure, just take the first step. Talk to your union. You've got nothing to lose. And if you do take that opportunity, the Wales TUC Education Service will be delighted to welcome you on your first Junior Learning Reps course.
Thanks, Maz. Just before I hand back to Sian, perhaps we should just mention a little bit about the support after training. So there will be a huge amount of support offered by your own union. Once you've completed the Union Learning Rep courses, we don't sort of cut you off at that point and leave you to just get on with it on your own. The Wales TUC also offers a lot of support. So we run events like today, we run face-to-face events when we can. We do workplace visits, so we're quite happy to come out to your workplace and visit you in normal times. God, it's been a long time since I did that. And there are obviously also WULf project managers. Most unions have a WULf project, and we've got dedicated WULf project managers for each of them. So if you've been listening and you think you'd like to sign up to be a ULR, or you know somebody who might, we've got a date, some dates in the pipeline. So our next online ULR Stage 1 course is ready and waiting for reps to register. The dates are the 1st to the 3rd of June, and then there's a little break, and then there's 2 more days on the 7th and 8th of July. And if you'd like to register, just let us know by emailing our dedicated ULR email address, which is wulr@tuc.org.uk. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lindsay and Marion, for quite an inspirational approach to recruitment there. Really excellent. And I do hope that everyone who's listening can think about somebody who might want to take up that role. I'm mindful, colleagues, that we are running over a little bit. So what I would ask you to do is to type your questions in the chat box. If we're not in a position to get to them by the time that we close, we will respond to you. Okay, so let us know who you are and pop them in the chat box. Now, our final contribution, which I've been really looking forward to actually, is from Kim Johnson from the CWU Union. Kim has been a ULR herself. It's how she started off. But for many years, she's also been the WULf project manager. So she knows about all the barriers that have come up in her incredible career, really, as a WULf project manager for CWU. So if I can hand over to Kim to close our session.
Thank you very much, Sian. Right, well, I've been asked to speak about starting out as a ULR, which was a long time ago for me. But luckily in my position as a project worker, I am able to see new ULRs start out, see them after their training. And that's the time when they're rearing to go. They're very motivated. And that's something that we need to capture as a union. That's the time when they can take things on board, can't wait to do something. But they also need to be proactive and look for someone who could mentor them. It's always better to have some support, get somebody who you get on with really well, who you can ask questions, and to help you settle into the role. It may be that there are other ULRs in the branch that you are associated with, or you may even have a lead ULR or learning coordinator, in which case they would be the best people to help you and set you on the road to actually do things the way that they have, or how you can discuss new ideas, because that's the thing with new ULRs. They can bring innovation to the branch and to the other ULRs who are there. One of the main things that you need when you're setting up learning in a workplace is to have a learning committee. Now, a learning committee can be as big or small as you want. However, if it gets too big, it can get out of hand, and people are always saying they can't attend. But mainly you would need the employer, a representative from different providers, and of course the ULRs. And the reason for having a learning committee is so that you can discuss, different topics regarding learning, see what is available from providers. It may be worthwhile, and I know it is, because on our learning committees we do have Wales TUC representatives, and it is worthwhile having somebody there from the Wales TUC who can help things along. Also put you in touch with people. The Learning Committee can then arrange events, learning events, and do surveys. And the information that you gather then can be shared. It doesn't have to go down to a person's name. You don't give any details away, any private personal details away, but just to let the Learning Committee know what the interests are of the learners in the place that you work in. This Learning Committee can then put together a learning agreement. These can be very valuable in the workplace and ensure that ULRs are given the time off that they're entitled to. However, I think there are some pitfalls, and everyone involved in a learning agreement needs to be flexible and perhaps compromise on occasions. I know in some of the places where we have members, I'm sorry, that's my dog barking, there's somebody at the door. Excuse me, I'll be back now.
You know, that happened to me the other day. It can be so embarrassing when your dog.
So sorry, but I should have been on.
No problem.
Should have been on earlier, shouldn't I? Right, I've lost my flow a bit now. There we go. Let's have a look. Yeah, on a learning committee, it may also be valuable to have a learner or two attend now and again, just to ensure that you hear the learner's voice, and not only you, but the employer and the provider. You should have regular communication with your learners and your members, and need to ensure that all the shifts, attendance patterns and sites are included. You could you need to promote learning, and to do this, it's great to hold events now and again, whether you have a learning day where your providers can come and give tasters into different courses. You could have, you can promote your WULF project if you've got one with your union, and it can become something that you do on a regular basis, and the learners look forward to it. It's something different. If the employer is on board, he may give them extra time added onto their break or their lunch so that they can attend. And it works really well, I've found. Well, the last bit is what did becoming a ULR do for me? Well, it gave me confidence, and it got me involved in lifelong learning, so much so that when I was 50, I went to university and got a degree in post-compulsory education and training. And I have done a little tutoring for my union, tutoring union skills courses and ULR courses, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. And it does improve your skills. It improves your confidence. The more you do, the better you get at it. And it just opened a whole new world for me. So, and I hope it does that for all ULRs, especially those who are on their course now. So that's quick and over with. And I'm sorry about the dog or dogs, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kim. That really is lived experience, isn't it? And thank you for sharing with us, you know, your return to higher education, something you hadn't done when you were younger, and how you've used that to support your members and to take them through their learning journey. So I think that's truly inspirational story, Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm mindful it's now 12 o'clock where we were intending to finish. But I think those of us who are here would be happy to take any questions. If anybody's got anything burning that they want to ask at this time, quite happy to take those. If you could raise your hand. Okay, Gavin, I can't see any hands raised. Can you?
I can't see a hand raised, Shan, but there is a question from Christopher Hall. Our managers were nasty and manipulative at HMCTS. We did learning at work days, and management discouraged staff from attending and limiting it. Sorry, I can't speak today. But then they took over our style of events and allowed the staff to attend their events. And it just stops there. So I don't know if that's something that we can comment on or address.
I think that's interesting. Actually, Kim, would you be happy to respond to that? Because I know that you've had different experiences with different managers over time.
Yes, what I would say is to try to do a joint event. It's always better when you do a joint event, because then they have to be involved. They are more likely to let people have time to visit, and they'll be visiting what you've arranged as well as what the management has arranged. And that's what we tend to do when we have learning events in the workplace. We always do it in partnership with the employer.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm mindful now that we need to wrap up. I think it's been an incredibly valuable morning. I've learned stuff, which I think is really useful. And I hope that those of you who are able will be talking to your peers in the workplace, or think about yourselves becoming ULRs, or indeed understanding, if you are ULRs, how much support is available out there for you. In the Wales TUC, and Angharad Halpin is the person who looks after all the support that we provide for union learning reps. And I'm sure Angharad would be happy to have a chat with you about any issues that arrive. So do feel free to contact Angharad, or indeed any of the learning officers or myself about any queries that you have. Couple of final things. Firstly, could we ask you to fill out your feedback form? We can't get better if you don't tell us what's wrong, and we'd like to hear what we've done right as well. So that would be really helpful. And finally, the ULR survey. Obviously, the bigger the sample that we get back, the more influence it can have on our way forward. So it just remains for me to thank you all very much for attending. And I can't say wish you a safe journey home, but once again, my thanks. Goodbye now.